They say history is written by the victors. But sometimes, there are no victors left to tell the tale. Long before nuclear meltdowns and industrial explosions, long before oil spills and chemical clouds, humanity possessed an unmatched talent for self-destruction. With nothing more than primitive tools, unbridled ambition, and catastrophic judgment, our ancestors unleashed disasters so devastating they rewrote the very landscape of civilization. Today, we journey through the shadows of antiquity to uncover the 10 most catastrophic man-made disasters that occurred before the modern era began. 10. The Great Fire of Rome, 64 AD. While Emperor Nero didn't actually fiddle as Rome burned, fiddles hadn't been invented. Yet this disaster represents one of history's most devastating examples of urban catastrophe compounded by human negligence and possible arson. The fire began on July 1964 AD in the merchant area of the Circus Maximus. Fueled by summer wines and fed by Rome's densely packed wooden structures, the inferno raged for 6 days and 7 nights. When the flames finally died, 10 of Rome's 14 districts lay in ruins, and hundreds of thousands of citizens were left homeless. 9. The collapse of the Amphitheater at Fidenae, 27 AD. In the reign of Emperor Tiberius, the Roman passion for gladiatorial games led to one of history's deadliest structural collapses. Atilius, a freedman seeking quick profit, constructed a massive amphitheater in Fidenae using substandard materials and cutting corners on the foundation. The structure was designed to hold thousands of spectators eager to witness gladiatorial combat. However, Atilius had built his arena on unstable ground with inadequate supports. During a packed event, the entire structure catastrophically collapsed, crushing an estimated 50,000 people in what Roman historian Tacitus called one of the worst disasters of the era. 8. The destruction of Carthage's harbor, 146 BC. While often viewed as a military victory for Rome, the systematic destruction of Carthage represents one of history's most devastating examples of engineered environmental and economic catastrophe. The Romans didn't just defeat their rival, they orchestrated the complete annihilation of one of the ancient world's greatest cities. Carthage's artificial harbors were marvels of ancient engineering, capable of housing hundreds of warships and merchant vessels. These harbors were the economic lifeblood of a civilization that had thrived for centuries. When Roman forces finally breached the city walls after a 3-year siege, they implemented a deliberate policy of total destruction. The Romans systematically filled in the harbors with rubble, demolished every building, and reportedly sowed salt into the agricultural land surrounding the city. This wasn't merely conquest, it was calculated obliteration of an entire ecosystem and economy. The destruction of Carthage's maritime infrastructure eliminated a crucial Mediterranean trade hub, disrupting commerce networks across North Africa and southern Europe for generations. While military in nature, this disaster was fundamentally about the human capacity to destroy sophisticated urban and economic systems through systematic planning and execution. 7. The Yellow River Flood of 1642. In one of history's most devastating examples of environmental warfare, the Ming dynasty's military forces deliberately destroyed dikes along the Yellow River to halt advancing Qing forces. This decision created one of the deadliest floods in recorded history. The Yellow River, known as China's Sorrow for its tendency to change course and cause floods, had been carefully controlled through an extensive system of dikes and levees. When Qing forces threatened the Ming capital, desperate military commanders made the catastrophic decision to breach these flood controls near Kaifeng. The resulting deluge was unprecedented in scale. Water covered approximately 100,000 square kilometers, destroying hundreds of cities and towns. Conservative estimates suggest 300,000 people died directly from the flooding, but when considering long-term famine, disease, and displacement, the death toll may have exceeded 1 million. The strategic value of the flood was questionable at best. It temporarily slowed the Qing advance, but failed to prevent the eventual fall of the Ming dynasty. Meanwhile, the environmental and human cost was staggering. Fertile agricultural land was ruined, trade routes were disrupted, and entire regions became uninhabitable. 6. The Great Library of Alexandria Fire, multiple incidents, 48 BC to 642 AD. The destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria represents not a single disaster, but a series of man-made catastrophes that eliminated one of humanity's greatest repositories of ancient knowledge. While the exact details remain debated among historians, the cumulative destruction of this intellectual treasure represents one of civilization's most profound losses. The library, established in the 3rd century BC, housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls containing the accumulated wisdom of the ancient world. Its destruction occurred through multiple incidents spanning centuries, each caused by human conflict and negligence. The first major damage occurred in 48 BC when Julius Caesar's forces accidentally set fire to ships in Alexandria's harbor. The flames spread to nearby warehouses storing scrolls intended for the library. Later incidents included Christian riots in 391 AD that destroyed the Serapeum, a daughter library, and the Arab conquest in 642 AD, though the extent of destruction during this final event remains disputed. What makes this disaster particularly tragic is that it was entirely preventable. Each incident resulted from political conflict, religious intolerance, or military action that prioritized immediate tactical goals over preserving irreplaceable cultural heritage. The loss represents centuries of scientific, mathematical, literary, and philosophical knowledge that might have accelerated human progress by centuries. 5. The burning of the Second Temple 70 AD. The Roman destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem represents one of antiquity's most devastating examples of cultural and religious annihilation through systematic destruction. This wasn't merely a military victory, it was the calculated elimination of the spiritual and political center of Jewish civilization. The Siege of Jerusalem lasted from 70 AD and culminated in the complete destruction of the Second Temple, one of the ancient world's most magnificent religious structures. Roman forces, led by future Emperor Titus, not only demolished the building but systematically looted its treasures and enslaved or killed most of the city's population. The temple's destruction had catastrophic consequences that extended far beyond the immediate loss of life and property. It marked the beginning of the Jewish diaspora, scattering survivors across the Mediterranean world and fundamentally altering the course of Western civilization. The elimination of the temple cult transformed Judaism from a temple-based religion into its modern form. Archaeological evidence suggests the Romans deliberately targeted not just the temple, but the entire infrastructure that supported Jewish religious and cultural life in Jerusalem. They destroyed schools, libraries, and community centers, attempting to eliminate Jewish civilization entirely from its homeland. 4. The Ming Dynasty's forced population relocations, 1368 to 1644. One of history's largest man-made humanitarian disasters occurred not through a single catastrophic event, but through systematic policies implemented by the Ming Dynasty that forcibly relocated millions of Chinese citizens, resulting in staggering death tolls and social disruption. Beginning with the dynasty's establishment in 1368, Ming emperors implemented massive population transfer programs designed to redistribute citizens from overcrowded regions to sparsely populated frontiers. These relocations were often mandated by imperial decree, giving families little choice but to abandon their homes, communities, and livelihoods. The most devastating relocations occurred during the early Ming period, when entire populations were forced to move hundreds or thousands of miles to establish agricultural colonies in remote regions. These forced migrations lacked adequate planning, supplies, or infrastructure to support the relocated populations. Conservative estimates suggest that millions died during these transfers from starvation, disease, exposure, and violence. Unlike natural disasters or military campaigns, these deaths resulted directly from government policy decisions that prioritized political control and economic theory over human welfare. The relocations disrupted traditional agricultural patterns, destroyed established trade networks, and created social instability that persisted for generations. Many relocated communities never successfully established themselves in their new locations, leading to abandoned settlements and wasted human resources on an enormous scale. 3. The collapse of the aqueduct at Antioch 526 AD. The catastrophic failure of Antioch's main aqueduct in 526 AD represents one of the most devastating infrastructure disasters of the Byzantine era, demonstrating how the neglect of critical urban systems can trigger cascading catastrophes. Antioch, one of the largest cities in the Byzantine Empire, depended entirely on its sophisticated aqueduct system for fresh water. This engineering marvel transported water from mountain springs across dozens of miles through a complex network of channels, bridges, and underground tunnels. The disaster began with a massive earthquake, but what transformed natural disaster into man-made catastrophe was decades of deferred maintenance and corruption among city officials. Critical structural supports had been weakened by neglect, and emergency repair funds had been diverted to other projects. When seismic activity struck, the compromised aqueduct system suffered complete failure. The collapse wasn't limited to the water supply falling. Masonry destroyed entire neighborhoods, crushing thousands of residents. More devastating was the aftermath. Without fresh water, disease spread rapidly through the city, killing additional tens of thousands. Archaeological evidence reveals that proper maintenance could have prevented the catastrophic failure. The aqueduct's original Roman engineering was sound, but Byzantine-era modifications and repairs were substandard. Corruption and incompetence had transformed a resilient infrastructure system into a death trap. The disaster led to Antioch's permanent decline from a major urban center to a minor provincial town, demonstrating how infrastructure failure can destroy entire civilizations. 2. The flooding of the Netherlands 1287 AD. The St. Lucia's flood of 1287 represents one of medieval Europe's most devastating examples of environmental mismanagement, leading to catastrophic loss of life. This disaster wasn't caused by exceptional weather or natural phenomena. It resulted from human decisions that left entire populations defenseless against predictable natural forces. Medieval Dutch communities had developed sophisticated systems of dikes, polders, and drainage channels to reclaim land from the North Sea. These engineering projects allowed dense populations to thrive below sea level, but they required constant maintenance and coordinated management. In the years preceding 1287, political conflicts and economic pressures led to neglect of critical flood defenses. Maintenance work was deferred, and disputes between local authorities prevented coordinated responses to deteriorating conditions. When winter storms struck, the compromised defensive systems failed catastrophically. The resulting flood was unprecedented in medieval European history. Water inundated approximately 500 square kilometers, destroying hundreds of villages and drowning an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 people. The flood permanently altered the geography of the Netherlands, creating the Zuiderzee and changing the coastline for centuries. What makes this disaster particularly tragic is its preventability. The technology and knowledge existed to maintain effective flood defenses, but human factors, political conflict, economic priorities, and administrative incompetence created the conditions for catastrophe. The St. Lucia's flood demonstrates how the failure to maintain human-built environmental controls can amplify natural forces into civilization-ending disasters. 1. The Bronze Age collapse 1200 to 1150 BC. The Bronze Age collapse represents the most extensive man-made disaster in recorded history. A cascading civilization failure that destroyed multiple advanced societies across the Mediterranean and Near East within a single century. Around 1200 BC, a complex network of Bronze Age civilizations suddenly began collapsing in rapid succession. The Mycenaean Greeks, Hittite Empire, Egyptian New Kingdom, and numerous smaller states all experienced simultaneous political, economic, and social breakdown. Cities were abandoned, trade networks vanished, and technological knowledge was lost for centuries. While natural factors like climate change and earthquakes contributed to the crisis, the collapse was fundamentally caused by human decisions and systemic vulnerabilities built into Bronze Age civilization itself. These societies had become increasingly specialized and interdependent, creating a fragile system where local failures could trigger regional catastrophes. The collapse began with the mysterious sea peoples, likely refugees from earlier societal breakdowns, who migrated violently across the Mediterranean. Their movement created a chain reaction. Displaced populations attacked neighboring regions, disrupting trade routes and agricultural systems. As bronze production required tin from distant sources, supply chain disruptions eliminated the technological foundation of these civilizations. Archaeological evidence reveals systematic destruction of palaces, administrative centers, and urban infrastructure across the entire region. Written records disappear, suggesting not just political collapse but the complete breakdown of literate administrative systems. The disaster scale was unprecedented. Multiple advanced civilizations with populations in the millions were reduced to scattered village-level societies. Technological regression was so severe that ironworking, though known, didn't become widespread until centuries later, simply because the social organization required for complex metallurgy had been destroyed. The Bronze Age collapse demonstrates how interdependent civilizations can create vulnerabilities that transform local crises into global catastrophes. It remains history's most comprehensive example of how human organizational failures can destroy centuries of cultural and technological progress. These 10 disasters, separated by centuries and continents, share a common thread. They were all preventable. Each resulted from distinctly human choices: corruption, negligence, hubris, or simply the failure to consider consequences beyond immediate goals. From the Bronze Age collapse to the Ming Dynasty relocations, these catastrophes remind us that our capacity for destruction has always matched our capacity for creation. The tools may have been simpler, but the consequences were no less devastating. Entire civilizations vanished, irreplaceable knowledge was lost, and millions of lives were cut short by decisions made in distant palaces and council chambers.